Joining us now is Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. He's a member of the Homeland Security and Judiciary Committees.
Senator, this forum today, and for people at home that are like, well, what's the difference? Well, you did not have Republican support in doing this. And so as the ranking member, as the Democrats, you all came together to have a forum. It's not an actual hearing. But I think it was very instructive, and people need to hear what this very brave whistleblower had to say. I want to play more from Mr. Schwenk. He said it doesn't matter what we teach if cadets see is that they can get away with things. Take a listen.
I saw a cadet in a scenario where we had bystanders who were allegedly filming or recording what was happening, pull out pepper spray and pepper spray a bystander. And when we asked the cadet afterwards why they did it, their answer was, it's because I've seen what we're doing in Minneapolis. It doesn't matter what we teach them about the law if what they watch on television and on Reddit and on the internet tells them that they can get away with things.
Shocking. You said today the truth is that ICE and DHS have deliberately and purposely trained their agents to break the law. I'm shocked as I say those words, but they are the truth. Tell us more.
They are the truth, and this brave whistleblower, and it took a lot of guts and grit for him to come forward with the assistance of Whistleblower Aid, told the truth that undercut and, in fact, challenged what ICE and DHS have been telling the American people. In fact, they are training agents to violate the Fourth Amendment deliberately and purposefully. They have shrunk the training program so that ICE agents receive less training in crowd control or use of force than your police force does. But they've also trained agents to think they can barge into a home, break down the door without any judicial warrant. That's a matter of explicit policy that they have concealed in a memo that this whistleblower told us they purposely didn't even give him a copy of, but told him he should train agents that they need not obtain a judicial warrant. So I think that, in fact, what we see here is an institutional, intentional effort to violate the law as a result of training agents who then go out to the streets of Minneapolis, but all across the country. California, Chicago, we have instances of ICE agents shooting people and dragging them out of cars. It's not accidental or aberrant. It is a purposeful policy.
Senator, in addition to Mr. Schwenk, we also heard from Tiana Gibson Brown. She is a United States citizen whose home was entered without a judicial warrant. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
They hit the door 3 times until the door popped open. My stomach fell. I heard the door pop, and I realized we were no longer protected. Far away from ever experiencing anything like this, we've never known anything of the sort. The officers stood at the door, and they were pointing their guns at us. 10 officers that were all armed were standing in front of me and my family. Words can never be sufficient for me to portray what sorts of horror we felt in this moment.
Senator, tomorrow night, when the President of the United States stands before this country and tries to take a victory lap on immigration, how do Democrats make sure that the attention is on the United States citizens who are having their civil liberties overrun by this administration?
We're going to elevate this testimony from Tiana Gibson Brown, which was so powerful in juxtaposition with the whistleblowers, because Americans wonder, and I hope we can show that video again and again and again, not just of her testimony, but what actually happened to her on that day. Americans don't recognize their great nation in what happened to her. But it's no accident. In fact, if they wonder why it happened, listen to what the whistleblower said about how they're training ICE agents to do exactly what happened to her. They're not rogue agents. They're acting under orders. And to Donald Trump, who's going to spew a bunch of untruths, just as the acting director has done, the acting director of ICE in his testimony before Congress, I hope we can directly challenge it tomorrow
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, but ICE is kicking down doors of American citizens, black, white, Latino, or otherwise, in this country. And it's like, Kristi Noem was trying to shut down PreCheck and Global Entry because
you saw where that went, right? Well,
this is insane.
Here's the thing, though. I think it's, Alicia put her finger on that button a little bit when she, in noting, that these civil liberties are being taken, that they are being rolled back. But here's the thing that Alicia, the point that she made. The president tomorrow is going to get up in the podium in the well of the Congress, and he's going to lie directly to the American people. And Republicans will sit there and applaud like little seals every lie that comes out of his mouth. And so it does become incumbent, in combination to what Alicia and Simone have said tonight, to ask the question, how do you frame the narrative, the takeaway narrative from what the American people hear? You cannot allow the lies to set in any more than they already have. They just can't. And so there has to be, and this is why I appreciate the forum today, because you've got people on record now who were in the building, as they say, who were in the room where it's happened, watching as your office, your staff released today in its memo, the DHS whistleblower document noting that, ICE plans to train nearly 4,000 fewer officers, eliminate 12+ exams for ICE officers, cut classes for its officer training, and cadets, as we talked about, are receiving fewer hours of training, as exampled a little bit ago. So how do we help the American people understand what they're hearing tomorrow night is a crock from a man who has a vested interest in selling crockery to the American people?
Well, I just want to tell you, every day I am angry and frustrated beyond words by this president. And I'm using every tool, and so are my colleagues, to fight back. I'm going to come out of that chamber tomorrow, and I'm going to say exactly what I feel, which is you have just heard, I'm not going to use any four-letter words, but it is disgraceful and shameful that a president would tell these untruths to the American people, just as everyone in his administration is doing. And we're going to try to elevate Tiana Gibson Brown because her credibility far exceeds any politician. Her story, her face and voice, Ryan Shantz, who took this immense risk with his career and personal life to come forward and speak truth power. Ryan Schwank is a hero, and he deserves to be elevated. So I think we need to use whatever platforms and podiums we have. The president has a bully pulpit, but we need to fight back as best we can with all the energy that we can muster. And that's what I'm going to be doing through more hearings. We're going to be having more hearings, and I hope it won't be on a day when New York is deluged with snow and when the president's about to deliver the State of the Union. But we're going to hold them accountable. And I think there ought to be other ways to do it as well.
I think there are a lot of people that would agree with you. I believe Alicia has the last question for you, sir.
I do. I have a quick question, Senator, which is you're choosing, as I understand it, to attend the State of the Union where fellow senator from the state of Connecticut, Chris Murphy, is choosing not to attend it, along with Representative Larson, Representative Himes. They're going to be attending a counter rally held on the National Mall the same night. I'd just love to hear your thinking. Why do you feel it is important to be there, to sit in the chamber?
I respect that there are lots of ways to show defiance and differ with the president. I'm going to be in the room because I want to be face to face, and I want to show the American people that not everyone is clapping and applauding and standing. I'm going to be staring straight at them, and I'm going to come out of the chamber, and I'm going to use whatever means I can to tell the truth. So we're evenly split as a delegation. 3 of us are going, 3 of us are not. And I respect, the efforts to have alternatives. But I want to be there in the room facing him with silent defiance.
Single biggest story The biggest development in American politics since Donald Trump first descended that golden escalator at Trump Tower more than a decade ago. Donald Trump is right now, as we come on the air, at his lowest point in terms of popularity in his political life. And now more than ever, there is both a permission structure and a growing imperative to speak out against Donald Trump and his administration. A brand new poll from CNN shows Donald Trump's approval rating at just 36%. Among independents, Donald Trump's approval rating is 26%. Just 32% of all Americans think Donald Trump has the right priorities. 68%, almost 70% of all Americans say that Donald Trump is not paying attention to the most important problems they face in their lives. At this very moment, Donald Trump appears intent on proving those 68% of us right. Trump is doubling down on one of his least popular issues, the tariff regime. In the wake of the Supreme Court giving him a political get-out-of-jail-free card by striking down his tariff regime as illegal and unconstitutional, Donald Trump, snatching defeat from political victory, has announced he's going to impose a 15% global tariff. He says he's allowed to keep that in place for 150 days. In a post on Truth Social this morning, Trump threatened to use tariffs, quote, in a much more powerful and obnoxious way with legal certainty, end quote. If there's one thing Americans have said they hate, it is Donald Trump's tariffs. Americans have been consistent about that in poll after poll after poll, and those Americans include people who voted for him. The latest, a survey in the Washington Post, Ipsos, and ABC News that finds just 34% of Americans approve of Donald Trump's handling of tariffs, 64% disapprove, identical to what it was back in April. And doing nothing to help the image of an administration that is deeply out of touch, pictures emerged over the weekend of Donald Trump's hand-picked FBI director, Kash Patel, chugging beer and screaming and wearing a gold medal after the glorious U.S. men's hockey team won gold at those Olympics. Kash Patel was there on the taxpayers' dime while the FBI faces multiple crises here at home. In the midst of all of this, Donald Trump is claiming that if you look closely, support for him still exists. It's just, quote, silent.
Tom Homan, Kristi Noem, our people, they've been incredible, the job they've done. And they take nothing but abuse, but, you know, they're sort of pretty hardened to that, I think, because they know they're doing the right thing. It just amazes me that there's not more support out there. It's just, we actually have a silent support.
Kristi Noem of self-described, I had to shoot my puppy fame. Silent support, okay. On Earth 1, in reality, and increasingly on Earth 2, too, solid majorities of Americans oppose Donald Trump and his entire agenda. And those Americans are feeling braver and braver about being louder and louder. Signs of resistance to Donald Trump are now sprouting up everywhere you look in the public arena, and that is a real shift. With all eyes on Team USA, the Olympics, athlete after athlete after athlete had the courage to make themselves heard. Here's skier Chris Lillis.
I feel heartbroken about what's happened in the United States when, I'm pretty sure you're referencing ICE and some of the protests and things like that. I think that as a country, we need to focus on respecting everybody's rights and making sure that we're treating our citizens as well as anybody with love and respect. And I hope that when people look at athletes compete in the Olympics, they realize that that's the America that we're trying to represent.
In an interview released last week, Olympic gold medalist Alyssa Liu opened up about her feelings about the Trump administration.
I think it is really important also to, notice the faults in our own government. Very, very similar to my dad. Things are a little rough in our country.
A little rough in our country. Tennis star Coco Gauff also spoke out. She told reporters at a tournament in Dubai this, quote, I don't think people should be dying in the streets just for existing. It is tough to wake up and see something because I do care a lot about our country. I think people think I don't for some reason, but I do. I'm very proud to be American. You don't have to represent the entire values of what's going on in the leadership. I think there are a lot of people around that I believe in the things I believe in diversity and equality. Here at home, there is a vibrant and growing protest movement. In Minneapolis, superstar singer Brandi Carlile invited a group of activists to join her in singing a song that has become a rallying cry to the resistance to ICE and to Donald Trump's brutal immigration enforcement tactics. Watch some of that moment.
Singing Resistance. Oh, it's okay to change your mind. So what's the courage? Leave this behind. Oh, it's okay to change your mind. And you can join us here anytime. Oh, it's okay to change your mind. So what's the courage?
This rising tide of resistance to Donald Trump in every corner of American public life, from sports to entertainment to music, and growing. As Donald Trump's approval rating and standing with the American people sinks lower and lower, is where we start today. Political analyst, the former Senator Claire McCaskill is here. Also joining us, senior contributing editor Michelle Norris is back, plus political analyst and pollster Cornell Belcher is with us as well. I could talk about Brandi Carlile and the athletes for the whole hour, but let me just root myself in data. Cornell, tell me what you see in the polls.
Well, I see a sort of cratering that, frankly, Nicole, I haven't seen since we voted Donald Trump out of office several years back. All the data, and look, Nicole, something that we talked about a great deal is the middle of the electorate, where a lot of elections are won or lost. If you look at the Washington Post numbers around moderates, over 60% disapprove of his jobs, moderate voters. And that moderate swath of the electorate is where you win a lot of elections. And if you look at suburban voters, which I pay a lot of attention to it in the data, you have over 60% of suburban voters disapproving of his job overall. And then you get into the details of it around economy, around inflation, and even around immigration. These key middle of the electorate, moderate voters and suburban voters have turned hard against the president. And I think when you look at how Democrats have been overperforming for the last year in special elections and off-year elections, that you see that moderate and that sort of that moderate swath of voters, those independent voters who often determine elections along with turnout, moving solidly against the president. And I think at some point, if you're going into a midterm, Nicole, the Republicans have to try to change those numbers, because you cannot go into a midterm with these sort of numbers for your party and the top of the ticket.
Cornell, let me just go a little deeper here. So this is the difference from 1 year ago. And I think the reason I have looked and scoured the country for signs that the culture was going to lead or sort of reflect our politics is from something Joan Baez said to me. She said, we had each other and we weren't looking for politicians. And, she talked about singing with Martin, with Martin Luther King Jr. And so I started looking outside of just elected Democrats, and I started looking at the culture. And I have tracked almost daily what seems to be a ballooning, sort of a swell of this safety in numbers, which is something that you heard the people on the streets of Minneapolis talk about. How can you be out there after Renee Nicole Good was murdered? Well, because we're safer together. 17 days later, Alex Preddy is killed, and they're out there in larger numbers than after Renee Nicole Good is out there. There seems to be a mirror, if you will, happening in culture and in sports, and it was really, really clear during the Olympics that there was permission structures suggest they were waiting for approval, almost like a sort of a safety structure, if you will, that they felt safe speaking out against what's happening in the country. Is that tracked in the polls, or are the polls sort of a reflection of that, or how do you see that correlating to the polls, Cornell?
Well, I think, and we've talked about this before, I think culture leads politics. Right, what you see happening in the social spaces and in culture spaces, they actually typically happen before you pick it up in data, and certainly before politicians start reacting to it. I think if you look at sort of the conversation that's going on, at least in the left of our political space right now, that wasn't initiated by Democratic elected officials. That was Democratic elected officials being led, right? And look, you've reported on it before, and I think it's remarkable the number of people who say that, again, they're not necessarily people who've been part of a protest before, and they're not been particularly partisan, but they got to take to the streets because of what they're seeing. And it's a values conversation. And I know so many of our Democratic friends want to say, oh, it's affordability, it's affordability. Those people aren't taken to the streets who've never taken to the streets because of affordability. It's a more values and aspirational thing that's happening. And again, you know it as well as I do, mobilizers are hope and anger and not sort of the best constructed economics argument. And I think what you see right now is a reaction to the values that so many Americans feel are being undermined by what's happening in this country, and that's far more effective than any economic argument that a Democratic consultant has come up with in the last several years.
All right, joining us, New York Times investigative correspondent based in Mexico City, Maria Abi-Habib, national correspondent for USA Today, Will Carlos, who was on vacation right near Puerto Vallarta and is currently stuck there, and an American living in Puerto Vallarta, Britt Trainum. Everybody, thank you so much. First, I want to start, I want to start with you, Britt. You live there. What did you wake up to?
Black smoke peering out of both windows. At first, I thought it was a rainy day, which didn't make sense because this is the dry season. Quickly, I realized it was smoke on both sides of my building and knew immediately something was wrong.
And when you looked out and you saw that and you started to investigate, what did you find out?
Clearly from I could see the main road, so it's from my rooftop. Things were on fire, and your mind immediately took it to this must be cartel related.
Why did you go so quickly to that?
I guess because normally things are very calm and peaceful and friendly here. So the one sort of underlining fear is that the safety bubble that Puerto Vallarta has been under might pop. And yesterday morning, it seemed to have popped.
Yeah. Maria, give us the context for this. This is the Mexican government going after the cartel. And it's a departure from past Mexican governments in the way that they had handled these cartels. What is the strategy for Maria Sheinbaum?
Well, Claudia Sheinbaum, Mexico's president,
Sorry.
no problem. She is basically, this is a huge departure from her predecessor, who was also her political mentor, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. He ended his term in late 2024. She took over October 2024. And when she took over, there was already a fracture within the Sinaloa cartel, which is considered to be one of Mexico's largest cartels, maybe slightly under in terms of power and resources, Jalisco cartel. So when the government here announced that they had killed El Mencho, the head of the Jalisco cartel, already to the north, Mexican security forces have been involved in a very bloody battle against the Jalisco cartel's rivals, which is the Sinaloa cartel. So right now, Mexico has a war on two fronts. They have never taken on cartels like this in their history. And whether or not they can take on these two cartels, which in terms of manpower and firepower, oftentimes rival Mexican security forces, remains to be seen. It is very difficult to have success in a two-front war. However, nobody can take away from them this major win, which is they took out El Mencho, and he is today's modern-day Pablo Escobar.
Is the Mexican government, is the army equipped to handle this? I know you were talking about how difficult it is, but do they have, these cartels are heavily armed. They have weaponry that is, it's not just guns any longer. It's very serious weaponry. Can the Mexican government, Mexican security forces handle this?
This is the big question. They have never been tested on this scale before. Even maybe 15 years ago, when former President Calderon decided to take on the drug violence here, he decided to take on one cartel, which was in the country's north. And that cartel did not have nearly the power or the reach geographically that these two cartels have. So by entering the second front against the Jalisco cartel, when they already have an active war in the north of the country against the Sinaloa cartel, this is going to test the Mexican military and other security forces like we've never seen before. When they want to do it, they can do it. It's been shown this was not easy. The Americans have been trying to get El Mencho for years. This has been an operation that they have tried to do for years together bilaterally. So this is a huge success. But where do we go from here, and what is the intention?
Yeah.
We don't fully understand the strategy yet, and we're waiting for them to announce the strategy. Is it one and done? You take out the cartel leader and you pack up and go home? Or is it going to be what you need to take out an organization like this, which has a global reach, is invested in the avocados you eat to the hotels that you might stay in? You have to attack finances. You have to attack the middle leadership, not just the top leadership. So whether or not they plan to do that, we are all waiting to figure out what is the strategy.
Yeah, and just, Maria, just to remind everybody, in case you're not a giant World Cup fan, the World Cup is being hosted partially down there in just a couple months. I think there's 4 games in Guadalajara. How does Mexico guarantee security given this?
This is part of the reason why it was so shocking for everybody, even diplomats in Mexico, people who used to be based in Mexico as ambassadors or whatnot, is, first of all, for any military, even the U.S. military, to open up a two-front war, that's complicated and very difficult. And then for this to happen just a few months before the World Cup, that's also extremely complicated. Do we think that they're going to cancel those games in Guadalajara and maybe move them up north to Monterrey, which is peaceful, to Mexico City, which is peaceful so far? We'll see. But also, Guadalajara is Mexico's 3rd largest economy, and this is going to have national impact on the national economy.
So, Will, you were there vacationing, and I just want to know that you also cover extremism and emerging threats for USA Today. So it feels like your vacation was suddenly confronted with your beat while you're down there. You're currently stranded. Give us an update on when you expect to be able to get out, and then also try to combine your area of expertise into what you're experiencing right now.
Well, so yeah, as you note, I cover domestic extremism in the United States, so kind of a very different world to the drug cartels down here. But I did come to try and unplug for a few days and instead ended up kind of snarled down here. We were leaving to go to the airport yesterday. We're in a little beach town called Sayulita, which is about an hour north of Puerto Vallarta. And we were told in no uncertain terms by the hotel manager, don't get on the roads. There are blockades. There's all sorts of violence. I think the main factor here is that there are tens of thousands of tourists here. A lot of people from Canada, a lot of people from the States, kind of trying to get some winter sun. And there's just no information, like no really good information coming from the U.S. government or really from the Mexican government. There's a lot of confusion. And one of the things, look, I've been a reporter for 20 years. One of the things that's been really interesting and sort of scary about this incident is the amount of fake news that's out. I mean, the number of times people have come up to me and said, the airports are closed or Costco's on fire and all of these different things that are just sort of videos that are spreading around the internet is pretty alarming to see. Like, yes, there are obviously security incidents going on, but trying to separate what's actually happening from what's rumor and just made up and AI video is pretty tricky, and it's quite interesting to see.
That's interesting to experience it in real time and to have a trouble trying to figure out what's real and what's not. I was looking at, I think the airport images from down there and the people running for cover. Given that scene, how nervous are you? When will you feel comfortable leaving your hotel, leaving your space there, and going to the airport?
I think we just have to trust in the authorities to some extent. Look, I mean, it's one thing when the cartel sort of, has a surprise attack on an airport or somewhere else. I think once the airports have sort of been put on notice that this is a place that could be a target, you would hope that the Mexican government, the National Guard, is going to at least protect and offer extra security at those airports. But look, the long and the short of it is we've got to get home. The way that we get home is going to an airport. All we can do is get in a car, drive to the airport, hope that we are safe in the hour-long drive on the way there and hope that we're safe when we get there. So we're trying to time things so that we're not waiting around, so that we're not on the road for longer than we need to, and that we can just get there, hopefully pretty immediately, get on a plane, fly. Now, of course, we now have to fly through Guadalajara, which is where you've seen those scenes. So we're now sort of going to be stuck in Guadalajara. We're there for a few hours, and then we fly north. So look, we just have to put faith in the authorities and see, hope that they keep things protected. But it's a gamble to some extent. That's I guess that's travel in these parts of the world sometimes.
Yeah. All right. Will Carlos, thank you so much. Britt Trainham, stay safe out there. Seriously. You too, Maria. I appreciate it, everyone.
Let's bring in MS Now Capitol Hill reporter Kevin Fry, former Undersecretary of State for Diplomacy and Public Affairs in the Obama administration, Rick Stengel, and former Executive Director of the New York State Democratic Party, Basil Smikle. Rick and Basil are MS Now political analysts. Kevin, the House Democrats bill has, I think, an even tighter refund timeline. So I guess, when should consumers expect their refunds?
Well, that is the key question, and it's hard to see where the path is to that, because keep in mind, as you mentioned, the House has their own bill. It's pushing for a 90-day deadline, provided the bill gets signed into law, for the Customs and Border Protection to send this money out to businesses and then distribute, perhaps. Senate is pushing for 180 days. But keep in mind, the Senate bill only basically says it is the sense of the Senate. This is a non-binding suggestion. It is the sense of the Senate that those businesses should then pass on the savings from the reimbursed tariffs to consumers and small businesses. So by no means is this dictated in law. But obviously, this comes as Democrats have been pounding the pavement here on Capitol Hill and out in the public, making affordability a central tenet of their midterm message. And you imagine this fits in quite nicely with that. Now, one thing to keep an eye on here is on the House bill, that 90-day deadline bill. The lead sponsor of that legislation, his team tells me that they are looking at potentially pursuing a discharge petition to try to force a vote on the House floor on that if they're not able to get a commitment from the House GOP leadership to do so. Of course, Democrats have successfully deployed discharge petitions where they go around House leadership to force action on, for example, the Epstein files, on extending ACA subsidies. So could this be the next next domino to fall? We do know there are a handful of Republicans in the House who are very publicly celebrating the Supreme Court ruling. Think of Thomas Massie, think of Don Bacon, saying that this reaffirms that Congress has a role to play in tariff policy. The question is then, would they join on to try to force a vote on this? That's one of the dynamics to keep an eye on in the coming weeks on this.
Yeah, let's, Basil, talk about what Kevin calls the midterm messaging. There's a new Washington Post poll, which was in the field, I should say, before the Supreme Court decision, but it found that 64% of Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of tariffs. Does that lopsided number give Democrats an opening to maybe even sway Republicans to join them on this tariff refund bill?
Yeah, I do think it gives them an opening. Republicans, let's be clear, Republicans are still largely lockstep with the president, but there is some opportunity there with independents. And if you look at that poll, there is disapproval on the economy overall and also disapproval on specific elements of the economy, tariffs included in that. The president said during 2025 that he was going to get Americans a refund. Congress can do this if they want. So even if there is a difficult off-ramp for Democrats in trying to force Republicans' hand, one thing they have been really good at is calling attention to these issues, calling attention to the inconsistencies in the president's and Republican leadership's comments to voters about the economy, particularly around, as we saw, healthcare and affordability. So I definitely think there's an opportunity for Democrats here.
Well, Rick, Republican Congressman Don Bacon posted this on X, quote, President Trump obviously didn't read the Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch's majority ruling on tariffs. Congress has the authority over tariffs, but the president says no, writing on Truth Social. I do not have to go back to Congress to get approval of tariffs. It has already been gotten in many forms a long time ago, exclamation point. They were also just reaffirmed by the ridiculous and poorly crafted Supreme Court decision. Look what Congressman Bacon has opposed the president before, but where does all this leave us, Rick?
Well, it's a good question. And of course, Chris, as you know, Article 1 of the Constitution says only Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes. Couldn't be clearer, and that was part of the Supreme Court decision. I think it leaves us. I think the Democrats are playing the politics of this smartly. I'm not sure any bill about refund is going to pass through the House and probably not the Senate. The irony, of course, is that the Supreme Court gave Donald Trump a get out of jail free policy. He could go, look, yeah, I have to abide by the Supreme Court, and he could get rid of an incredibly unpopular policy. Even this legislation, in a way, gives Trump an opportunity because he could start mailing checks to the American people that would get there in time for the midterms. Again, that's not going to happen. The Democrats are doing it smartly. It's always the economy. The American people don't care so much about the constitutionality of the decision of the Supreme Court. They care about the economy, and they feel like the Supreme Court is on their side, saying that tariffs are a bad policy. They were a good policy once in the 19th century. They're a bad policy now.
Well, in fact, Basil, if you go back to that poll that I just mentioned, the worst issue for the president is inflation. Hands down, right. Worst issue for the president is inflation. Not that the Democrats are doing so great in that poll, but the president's looking very poor. And tomorrow night, he does have a chance. It's called the State of the Union. Tens of millions of people generally watch it. So is it an opening for him, an opportunity for him?
Well, for a typical president, yes, it would be an opportunity for that president to be able to lay out a vision, talk about the record, lay out a vision, try to assuage the concerns of the voters, particularly the base, that the country is and going in the right direction and that he will steer it in the right direction. But we know this president doesn't stick to messaging that very well. And I expect it to be a very long rant about his policies that are going to go into a whole lot of other areas outside of the economy. But I think ultimately what's going to happen coming out of the State of the Union, certainly after this SCOTUS decision, is continued chaos, continued uncertainty, and small business owners are going to continue to have a really difficult time. I imagine that the big businesses can absorb tariffs for a period of time, but small businesses are going to struggle. And that I doubt that very much that there's going to be a specific message to them.
I think there's going to be a focused message, and we're told it's going to be about affordability, Rick, from Abigail Spanberger. She, of course, is the governor of Virginia, who's going to give the Democratic response. That response often gets fewer viewers than the president's does. But is that an opportunity for her and for that Democratic messaging?
Of course, it's an opportunity, Chris. I hope she does a great job. That's always one of the most thankless jobs that it's possible to have.
Completely thankless.
Yes, completely thankless. But to go back to Basil's point, and he understands polls a lot better than I do, it's always dangerous to tell voters something is true when they know it's not true. The thing that voters know better than anything else is they know the circumstances of their own lives. If you're telling them this is the greatest economy in history, we've never had so many jobs, everybody is thriving, they go, well, I don't know, I'm not, and I'm looking at the price of eggs, and maybe inflation has come down a little, but I feel it. So I think that there's going to be a disjunction between what Trump is saying at the State of the Union and how voters feel. And by the way, this is what happened when he was president the first time. He kept telling people that things were the way they were, and people would go, no, they're not. And he became a historically unpopular president. He's on the road to that again now.
Kevin, we mentioned this earlier. The president often almost always doesn't stick to script. But it is a tradition that maybe behind the scenes, leaders in Congress will suggest to the White House the things that they would like to hear from the president or the ways in which he might set them up for what is looking to be a very difficult midterms for them. What do we know about those conversations, or any hopes or lack of hopes that the Republicans might have for the State of the Union?
Well, to hit on what was just said, the Democrats want him to basically tie himself into knots during this speech, but the Republicans certainly would like him to tout that so-called one big beautiful bill, that reconciliation package that is essentially the cornerstone, their biggest legislative accomplishment from the first year, and tout the idea of tax cuts that were included there, especially as we are now in tax filing season. Whether or not he will stick to that message is the big question. And of course, there is a chance that he also goes sideways because members of the Supreme Court are going to be right in front of him. And he is clearly very angry about this tariff ruling. And he has not shied away from taking it out on members of the Supreme Court.
Kevin Fry, Rick Stengel, Basil Smikle, thank you all.